The house had always been too quiet at night. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums, filling the empty spaces with a stillness that felt heavier than silence itself. Claire had noticed it from the first week she moved in. By day, the little two-story rental seemed charming in its own worn, old-fashioned way. The creak of the floorboards felt quaint, the smell of aged wood comforting, and the strange angles of the rooms gave it a personality you didn't find in modern builds. But at night, the place became something else entirely. She had lived there for only a month when it started. At first, she thought it was just her nerves adjusting to a new space. After all, the human mind has a way of amplifying the smallest noises when you're lying awake in a strange bed. A pipe groaning in the walls becomes a whisper. A branch scraping against the siding transforms into fingernails. And an old door, well, doors had minds of their own, didn't they? The first time it happened, Claire didn't even notice right away. She had fallen asleep on the couch in the downstairs living room, the glow of the TV painting the walls in shifting blues. It was the slam that woke her, not loud but distinct. A click, then a slow creak, followed by the unmistakable sound of a latch slipping into place. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, disoriented. The front door stood wide open, letting in the chill of the night. She could have sworn she'd locked it. In fact, she knew she had. Claire had always been careful about that sort of thing, especially since moving to a new town where she didn't know anyone. She told herself she must have been more tired than she realized. Maybe she had dozed off before securing it. That explanation was comforting enough to get her through the night. But the next night, it happened again. This time, she had made a point of checking. She locked the front door, slid the deadbolt into place, and even tugged at the knob to ensure it was secure. Then, around 3 in the morning, she knew because the clock on the wall glared 3:02 in green numbers. The same noise jolted her upright in bed. The door had opened itself again, the night air spilling inside. Claire stood frozen in the hallway, staring at it. The latch was undone. The knob was slightly turned, and the door swayed gently, as though someone had only just walked through. She told herself there had to be a rational explanation. Old houses shifted with the wind. Locks sometimes slipped loose. Maybe the door frame was warped. But deep down, she didn't believe it. By the end of the first week, she realized the pattern. It always happened at 3 a.m., and it always happened the same way. No matter how carefully she locked it, the front door would click, creak, and then slowly swing open as though it had been waiting for that exact hour. Claire tried everything. She changed the locks. She wedged a chair under the knob. She even nailed a piece of wood across the frame one night, determined to prove that nothing could force it open. Yet when the clock struck 3, she woke to find the nails pried loose. The chair tipped over, the door ajar again. Her friends laughed when she told them. Old houses are like that, one said over coffee. You're just spooking yourself, another added. It's probably the wind. Or maybe you're sleepwalking and don't realize it. But Claire knew better. She could feel it in her bones, the wrongness of it. This wasn't just a door that wouldn't stay closed. It was something else. Something watching. Something waiting. The worst part wasn't the door itself. It was what came after. The first few nights, she thought it was just her imagination. When she went back to bed, she would lie awake, straining to listen past the thud of her heartbeat. And sometimes, just faintly, she would hear it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, measured footsteps on the wooden floorboards downstairs. They never came up the stairs. They never rushed or stumbled. They just moved, pacing, as though someone, or something, had let itself in and now wandered her home as though it belonged there. She was too afraid to check. Instead, she pulled the blankets to her chin and squeezed her eyes shut until the first light of dawn trickled through the curtains. By morning, the house would always be silent again. Nothing seemed disturbed. Nothing seemed moved. But the air carried the faintest smell of something stale, something metallic, something she couldn't quite place. It was the 8th night when she decided she had to know. Claire sat awake in the living room, phone clutched in her hand, every light turned off except for the dim lamp in the corner. She kept her gaze fixed on the door, its brass knob reflecting the glow like a watching eye. Her heart thudded in her chest as the clock ticked closer to 3. 2:59, her breath hitched. 3 o'clock. Nothing happened. 3:01. Her palms were slick with sweat. 3:02. Click. The knob twitched, as if something on the other side had turned it. The latch slid free, and with agonizing slowness, the door creaked inward. The night air spilled into the room, cold and damp. Claire raised her phone, thumb hovering over the emergency dial, her eyes locked on the threshold. The porch was empty. The street beyond was still. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing. And yet she couldn't shake the certainty that she wasn't alone. The air inside the house seemed to shift, heavier, charged, as though an unseen presence had crossed the boundary. Her skin prickled with goosebumps. She swore she felt someone standing just behind her, watching her even as she stared at the open doorway. But when she spun around, the room was empty. That was the night she realized the door wasn't opening to let something in. It was opening to let something out. The discovery sat heavy on Claire's chest, like a stone pressing into her lungs. The thought unsettled her more than anything she had imagined in those sleepless nights. The door wasn't being opened so something could enter. It was being opened so something could leave. That shift in perspective changed everything. For the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every creak of the house during daylight seemed sharper, more deliberate. When the fridge motor clicked on, her shoulders tightened. When a neighbor's dog barked at nothing, her skin prickled. She began to notice things she hadn't before. Small details. A hairline crack in the paint around the doorframe that hadn't been there the day before. A faint indentation on the couch cushion, as if someone had been sitting there while she was at work. A whisper of cold air on the back of her neck as she passed the hallway, despite all the windows being closed. And always, her thoughts circled back to 3 a.m. She tried to resist, tried to go to bed early, to sleep through the hour. She drank herbal teas, played calming music, even left the television on for background noise. But nothing worked. Each night, her eyes would snap open at 2:57, as if her body knew what was coming. By 3:02, the ritual repeated itself. The click, the creak, the breath of night air slipping inside. She told herself she should move. Just pack up and leave, no questions asked. But moving wasn't so easy. Her lease was locked in for another 11 months. Her savings account was nearly empty from the deposit and first month's rent. She felt trapped, both by the house and by her own circumstances. So she did the next best thing. She decided to document it. On a cold Thursday evening, Claire set up her phone on a tripod in the living room, angled toward the front door. She downloaded an app that allowed continuous overnight recording and made sure the phone was plugged in. That night, she lay in bed with a sick twist of anticipation in her gut. When she woke, her phone's screen glowed with 5 hours of recorded footage. Heart pounding, she skipped ahead to the crucial minute. At 3:02, the door opened. Her breath caught as she watched. It wasn't just the door. She could see the knob turning on its own, the deadbolt sliding back as if pulled by invisible hands. Then the door creaked open, the frame shuddering lightly. For a few seconds, nothing, just the open doorway and the black stretch of porch beyond. And then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, a shift in the shadows. A ripple, like heat distortion in the air, that slipped across the threshold and vanished into the house. Claire slammed the laptop shut so hard the table rattled. Her hands trembled. She didn't want to see more. But curiosity, that insidious itch, drove her back. She forced herself to keep watching. After the ripple crossed into the house, the camera recorded nothing unusual, just stillness, the open door, the faint movement of curtains in the night breeze. But Claire knew better. She felt it. That day at work, she could barely focus. Numbers on her computer screen blurred. Coworkers' voices sounded distant. Where a manager asked if she was okay, she forced a smile, but her mind was still stuck in that dark living room, watching something she couldn't explain seep into her home. That night, she told herself she wouldn't watch again. She'd record, but she'd leave the footage untouched. Pretend ignorance. Pretend control. But at 7 a.m., When the sun had risen and the fear dulled, she found herself drawn back once more. The second night's footage chilled her even more than the first. The door opened at exactly 3:02. The ripple crossed inside. And then, something else. At 3:09, the lamp in the corner flickered just once. A tiny blip. Then, at 3:17, the couch cushion dipped. For a moment, it looked as though someone had sat down, though the cushion slowly rose again, leaving no trace. At 3:22, the faint outline of her reflection in the TV screen seemed distorted, elongated, though Claire knew she had been asleep upstairs. By the time the recording ended, she felt sick. It wasn't her imagination anymore. She had proof. The knowledge didn't make her safer. It made her more vulnerable. Now, every night, she knew with absolute certainty that something invisible, something unknowable, roamed her house while she slept. On the third night, she couldn't stop herself. She set the camera, lay awake, and watched the live feed on her phone in bed. The minutes crawled toward 3. Her pulse drummed in her throat. When the door opened, she nearly dropped the phone. The ripple crossed the frame again, and this time, the air seemed to bend around it. For the briefest moment, the distortion sharpened, taking on a vague suggestion of shape. A shoulder, a head, arms that hung too long. And then it vanished, dissolving back into nothingness. Claire clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. The feed stayed quiet after that, but she couldn't sleep. Not with the certainty that something was in her house. That it wasn't just pacing or wandering. It was observing, learning, waiting. By morning, she had made a decision. She needed answers. She started with the landlord. He was a tired-looking man with thinning hair and a half-buttoned shirt who brushed off her concerns with a laugh. "It's an old place," he said. "Doors swell, locks slip. It's nothing." When she pressed him, his face darkened. "Look, if you don't like it, you're welcome to leave. But you're still on a lease, and I'm not refunding your deposit." His indifference made her blood boil, but something in his expression unsettled her even more. The way his eyes darted away when she mentioned 3 a.m. The way his hand trembled as he fiddled with his pen. He knew something. Later that week, Claire visited the local library. The house was old. She had guessed early 1900s, so she scoured property records, newspaper archives, anything she could find. Most of it was dry and uneventful. Sales records, tax assessments, minor renovations. But tucked into an old newspaper from 1979 was a story that stopped her cold. Local family disappears without a trace. The article described a husband, wife, and their young daughter who had lived at her address decades ago. Neighbors reported last seeing them one evening. By the next morning, the house was empty. No signs of struggle. No valuables missing. The front door was found wide open. Despite a lengthy investigation, no bodies were ever found. Claire's stomach churned. The article didn't explain what had happened. It didn't need to. She could imagine it. The door opening. The ripple crossing the threshold. The family vanishing into the night, swallowed whole by something unseen. She left the library shaking. The words of the article burned into her mind. That night, she didn't set up her phone. She didn't want more evidence. Evidence wasn't going to save her. What she needed was a way out. She started browsing listings, even though she couldn't afford them. Cheap apartments, sublets, even motels. Anything to put distance between herself and that door. But each time she thought about leaving, a strange heaviness settled over her. It wasn't just financial strain. It was something deeper. A pull, like invisible hands pressing gently against her back, urging her to stay. The thought of walking away filled her with dread, as though leaving would mean forfeiting a game she hadn't agreed to play. That night, when the clock struck 3, she didn't watch. She pressed a pillow over her head and prayed for morning. But she couldn't block out the sound. The click, the creak, the faint shuffle of footsteps on the floor below. And then something new, a whisper, so soft she thought at first she was imagining it. A breath against the silence. A syllable carried on air. Her name, Claire. Her heart stuttered. Tears pricked her eyes. She curled tighter under the blanket, her body rigid with terror. The voice was neither male nor female, but layered, as if several mouths spoke at once in hushed unison. "Claire!" The sound drifted closer, floating up the stairs. She didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, the house looked the same as always. Bright, ordinary, harmless. But Claire knew it wasn't. The door was no longer just an opening. It was a wound, and something inside the house had finally decided to speak. Claire had always thought of herself as a rational person. She paid bills on time, kept her schedule neat, trusted facts over feelings. But by the third week in the house, she began to doubt not just the place around her, but her own mind. The whispers didn't stop after that first night. They returned, night after night, always at the same time, always right after the door opened. Sometimes faint, brushing the edges of her awareness like wind stirring dry leaves. Other times, clear enough that she could distinguish tones, inflections, the strange harmony of voices overlapping. They all said the same thing. Her name, over and over. At work, she found herself jumping at the smallest sounds. The buzz of a phone, the squeak of a chair. Even her co-workers noticed. Rough nights? One joked, half concerned. She forced a smile, but inside her thoughts ran in circles. She couldn't confide in them. She could barely admit it to herself. The exhaustion showed in other ways, too. She forgot her lunch one day, her keys the next. She left her car running in the driveway for half an hour, realizing only when a neighbor knocked on her door. Her manager pulled her aside and suggested she take a few days off. Burnout, he called it. But Claire knew better. The house had dug its claws into her. By the end of that week, she decided she couldn't endure it alone anymore. She called her sister, Melanie, who lived 2 towns over. "I just need you to see it," Claire said. Try to keep her voice steady. "Come for one night. Please." Melanie agreed reluctantly. She had always been skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained, quick to chalk up strange events to stress, imagination, or faulty wiring. But when she arrived that Saturday evening, suitcase in hand, her smile softened Claire's frayed nerves. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks," Melanie said, hugging her. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." That night, they stayed up together in the living room, sipping tea and talking in low voices. Claire explained everything. The nightly opening, the recordings, the whispers. Melanie listened patiently, though her brow furrowed deeper with each detail. At 2:58, the sisters fell silent. The clock ticked louder than ever. Claire's grip tightened on the mug in her hands. 3:02. Click. The knob turned. The latch slid. The door opened wide. Melanie's eyes widened, her face draining of color. "You saw that, right?" Claire whispered. Melanie nodded slowly, setting her mug down with trembling fingers. They waited breathless. The air in the room grew heavy, oppressive, as though pressing down on their lungs. And then it came, the whisper. "Claire." Melanie flinched, clutching her sister's arm. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The two of them sat frozen, listening. The whispers swelled, a chorus threading through the house. This time, Claire could hear her name interwoven with other fragments, words too garbled to make sense, but filled with an unsettling urgency. And then, as suddenly as it began, the sound faded. By dawn, Melanie's skepticism was gone. She refused to sleep, pacing the living room until light filtered through the blinds. "You need to get out of here," she said, voice hoarse. Claire, this isn't just in your head. I don't know what it is, but it's not safe." Claire wanted to agree, but when she opened her mouth, the same heaviness that had plagued her thoughts returned. The idea of leaving made her stomach twist, made her breath catch, as though the house itself tightened its grip around her. Melanie left that afternoon, promising to help research the house's history. Claire watched her car disappear down the street, a gnawing dread curling in her gut. For a brief moment, she envied her sister's freedom, the ability to drive away, to breathe clean air untainted by whispers. That night, the whispers were louder. Claire lay in bed, sheets tangled around her legs, listening as the chorus wound its way through the dark. And then, among the overlapping voices, she heard something new. Laughter. Soft, hollow, inhuman laughter woven into her name. Her heart thundered as the sound shifted. The voices no longer seemed to come from downstairs. They were closer, moving, rising. The floorboards in the hallway groaned. Claire sat up in bed, trembling, her eyes locked on the shadow beneath the door. The sliver of light from the street lamp outside flickered, warped, as though something enormous passed between her and it. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, directly on her bedroom door. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She pressed both hands over her mouth to stifle the scream clawing at her throat. The silence stretched. Then, softly, almost tenderly, the voice whispered from the other side. "Let me in." Claire didn't remember falling asleep, but when she opened her eyes, the morning sun streamed through the window. The bedroom door stood ajar. Her hand shook so badly she could barely call Melanie. She relayed the night's events in a rush, her words tripping over one another. "I believe you," Melanie said, though her voice carried an edge of fear. "I found something about the family that lived there. The daughter. Her name was Clara." Claire froze. The sound of her name in the whispers, the eerie familiarity. It hadn't been her name after all. It had been hers. "Clara," Melanie continued. "The article I found said the girl was 9 years old when they vanished. Some neighbors claimed she used to talk about hearing voices in the house, about the door that wouldn't stay shut. They thought it was just childish imagination. But then she trailed off. But then they disappeared," Claire finished. Her voice was barely audible. The rest of the day passed in a haze. She couldn't eat, couldn't focus. She wandered the house aimlessly, every creak of the floorboards making her jump. She kept glancing at the front door, half expecting it to swing open in broad daylight. That night, Claire locked herself in the bedroom, dragging a heavy dresser in front of the door. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, ready to call her sister, the police, anyone. At 3 a.m., the sound came anyway. Click, creak. The front door opened downstairs. The whispers rose, filling the house, vibrating in her bones. And then, impossibly, the dresser shuddered. Claire gasped as it scraped an inch across the floor, nudged by unseen force. The bedroom door rattled against its frame, louder and louder, as though something pushed from the other side. She pressed her back against the dresser, bracing it with her weight, tears streaming down her face. The voices pressed in all around her now, not whispers anymore, but a cacophony, a chorus of pleading and laughter and commands. And threaded through them, clear as day, was the voice of a child. "Let me in, Claire." Her vision swam. Her strength faltered. She felt the weight against the door grow heavier, relentless. The room spun as though the air itself had thickened. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The pressure lifted. The voices silenced. The dresser stood still. Dawn had arrived, but the relief was hollow, because Claire realized something then, something worse than any whisper or knock. Each night, the voices were growing bolder, stronger, and soon, they wouldn't ask to be let in. They would simply come. The house no longer felt like a place Claire lived in. It felt like a trap. Every corner seemed charged with a presence she couldn't see but could sense. Heavy, oppressive, waiting. The walls seemed closer somehow, as though the house itself were leaning in, listening to her every breath. Days blurred together. She moved through them on autopilot, speaking little, eating less. The world outside the house, the streets, the grocery store, her workplace, felt dreamlike, distant. The real world was inside these walls, in the stretch of silence before 3 a.m., in the moments when the air thickened and the door creaked open of its own accord. The nights had grown unbearable. The whispers were no longer confined to her name. They spoke in fragments, hushed conversations that slipped through the walls and floors like smoke. Claire could never quite make out the words, but she could feel their weight, insistent, commanding, filled with a dark urgency. Sometimes she thought she caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, a blur darting past a doorway, the faint sway of curtains when no window was open. Other times, it was more direct, the reflection in the TV screen shifting when she sat perfectly still, or the sensation of someone exhaling against the back of her neck while she brushed her teeth. And the door. Always the door. By the 4th week, It no longer waited until 3:02. She began waking at 2:50, her pulse already racing, and sometimes the door stood ajar before the clock even struck. She stopped recording. She couldn't bear to see more proof. But she couldn't leave, either. Each time she thought about packing a bag and walking out, a sick dread knotted in her stomach, a voice whispering at the edge of her thoughts. Where would you go? You belong here. Melanie called daily, her voice taut with worry. You're not making sense anymore, she said one evening after Claire trailed off mid-sentence, staring into a corner where the shadows seemed thicker. Please, let me come stay with you again, just until we figure this out. No, Claire said sharply. Don't come back here. It doesn't want you. It wants me. The words spilled out before she could stop them. Silence stretched on the line. Then Melanie whispered, Claire, listen to yourself. But Claire wasn't sure she was listening to herself anymore. That night, she tried something different. Instead of hiding in bed, she sat in the living room, facing the door directly. A single lamp cast long shadows across the walls. She sat rigid, hands clenched into fists, forcing herself not to blink. When the door opened, she didn't flinch. The cold air slithered across the floor, raising goosebumps on her skin. The whispers began immediately, soft and beckoning. Her name, again and again, woven into an unholy lullaby. Claire, Claire, let us in, she whispered back before she could stop herself. You're already in. The whispers stopped. The silence was worse. And then something moved in the doorway. Not a ripple this time. Not a distortion. Something darker, denser, taking shape. It lingered in the threshold, its outline wavering like smoke, but undeniably humanoid. Tall with limbs too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Claire's breath hitched. She wanted to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She sat frozen, eyes locked on the figure. It stepped inside. The shadows seemed to cling to it, folding and unfolding like fabric in water. Each step was soundless, yet she felt the vibrations through the floorboards. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring her terror. When it reached the center of the room, the whispers returned, now inside her skull. A chorus, layered and inescapable. We've waited so long. You open the way. You are ours. Claire clutched her head, teeth gritted against the cacophony. No, she screamed, her voice breaking. Leave me alone. The figure tilted its head, almost curious. For a moment, the shadows peeled back just enough for her to glimpse something pale within, the faint suggestion of a face. Eyes hollow, mouth stretched too wide. And then, in a child's voice, it spoke aloud. Clara. Claire's stomach lurched. The sound was sweet, high-pitched, but wrong, like a recording slowed and warped. Clara, it said again, stepping closer. It's time to come home. She scrambled to her feet, backing away until her shoulders hit the wall. I'm not her, she cried. I'm not Clara. The figure stopped. The room pulsed with silence, thick and suffocating. And then, in a single fluid motion, it dissolved, collapsing into smoke that seeped into the floorboards, the walls, vanishing as though it had never been there. Claire sank to the ground, shaking uncontrollably. When dawn finally came, she was still on the floor, staring at the open door. The days that followed blurred even more. Claire barely left the house now. Each time she tried, she felt eyes on her, tugging her back. At the grocery store, she stood frozen in the aisle, convinced someone whispered her name from between the shelves. At the gas station, the reflection in the glass door didn't move in sync with her own. She stopped answering Melanie's calls. It was easier that way, safer. But the nights grew worse. The figure appeared again and again, sometimes in the doorway, sometimes at the foot of her bed, sometimes reflected in the darkened window pane, staring at her even when she couldn't see its face. And always that voice, the child's voice, calling for Clara. One night, she gathered enough strength to confront it. When the door opened and the figure stepped inside, she shouted, "What do you want from me?" The whispers answered in unison, filling the room with unbearable pressure. We want you. You are hers. She is you. Claire shook her head violently. No, I'm not Clara. She's gone. She's dead. The figure drifted closer, its form flickering. And then, with horrifying clarity, the child's voice echoed. No. She's waiting. Claire pressed her hands over her ears, sobbing, as the figure loomed. She felt the air around her tighten, as though invisible fingers brushed her arms, her throat, her face. For a moment, she thought she would be dragged into the shadows then and there. But just as suddenly the pressure eased. The figure stepped back, retreating toward the door. Its form wavered, dissipating into the darkness outside. The whispers lingered, fading slowly, until silence reclaimed the house. Claire collapsed, chest heaving, her body drenched in sweat. She knew, with sick certainty, that it was only toying with her now, testing her resolve. And soon, very soon, it wouldn't stop. The next morning, Claire did something she hadn't done since moving in. She went to church. The building was small, tucked between shops downtown. She hadn't been religious in years, but desperation had stripped her of pride. She sat in a pew at the back, staring at the stained glass windows, her hands trembling in her lap. When the service ended, she approached the pastor, a kind-faced man with silver hair. She didn't give details. How could she? But she asked, "Do you believe places can hold on to things? Bad things?" The pastor's expression softened. "Some believe so," he said gently. "But I believe no darkness is greater than the light we carry. If something troubles you, you don't have to face it alone." He offered to bless her home. Claire hesitated, but finally agreed. That evening, he arrived with a small bottle of oil and a Bible. He prayed softly as he walked through each room, tracing symbols on the door frames. Claire followed close behind, her heart hammering. When they reached the front door, the pastor paused. The knob trembled beneath his hand. He looked at her sharply. "You should leave this place." Her throat tightened. "I can't." He met her gaze, and for a moment she thought he would insist. But instead, he only pressed the bottle of oil into her palm. "Then you must find your strength. Whatever lives here feeds on fear. Don't give it more than it's already taken." That night, Claire slept clutching the bottle. But at 3:02, the door still opened. And this time, the figure didn't hesitate. It stepped inside, solid, looming, its shadow stretching across the walls. The whispers rose to a deafening roar. And beneath them, clear and cruel, the child's voice whispered, "Almost." The word echoed long after it faded. Almost. It clung to Claire like a second skin, following her into every waking moment. Almost what? Almost hers? Almost taken? Almost gone? She tried not to think about it, but the more she resisted, the more the thought consumed her. She no longer felt like herself. When she looked into the bathroom mirror, the face staring back seemed softer, younger, her hair falling at a slightly different angle. Sometimes, just for an instant, she swore the reflection's lips moved on their own, mouthing a name she didn't want to hear. Clara. The next day, Melanie showed up unannounced. Claire had stopped answering calls, but her sister wasn't the type to give up easily. She knocked until Claire opened the door, blinking against the sunlight like she hadn't seen it in years. "God, Claire," Melanie whispered, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the pallor of her skin. "You look like a ghost." Claire almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead, she stepped aside silently and let Melanie in. The house was dim, curtains drawn tight. Dust clung to surfaces. A stack of untouched mail lay near the door. Melanie wrinkled her nose. "You've been living like this?" "It doesn't matter," Claire murmured. "It's not about the house. It's me at once." Melanie frowned. "Stop saying that. You're not making sense." Claire led her to the living room, lowering her voice. "I saw her. Clara, or something wearing her shape. It called to me, like I was supposed to answer." Melanie placed her hands firmly on Claire's shoulders. "Listen to me. You're not Clara. You're Claire, my sister. This," she gestured around the house, "this thing doesn't get to decide who you are. Do you hear me?" Claire wanted to believe her. For a flicker of a moment, Melanie's conviction anchored her. But the anchor slipped almost immediately, because in the silence between her sister's words, she heard another voice. A child's giggle drifting from upstairs. Claire stiffened. Melanie noticed. What is it? Claire swallowed hard. It's here. That night, Melanie refused to leave. I'm staying, she insisted, dragging a blanket onto the couch. Whatever happens, I'll be here with you. Claire wanted to argue, to protect her sister from what she'd endured. But the selfish part of her was relieved. At least she wouldn't face the darkness alone. They sat together in the living room as the minutes bled toward 3. The air thickened, electric the way it always did. Claire's hands shook in her lap. Melanie gripped her arm tightly. 3:02. The door opened. The figure stepped inside. It was clearer now, more solid than ever. Shadows clung to it like flesh, rippling as it moved. The child's voice rang out, no longer distant or muffled, but sharp and bright. Clara. Melanie's nails dug into Claire's skin. Do you hear that? She whispered. Claire nodded, unable to tear her eyes away. The figure tilted its head, its face hidden in darkness. The whispers swelled, overlapping, unbearable. Clara, come home. Claire's chest tightened. A strange warmth bloomed inside her, a pull so strong it made her sway forward. For a terrifying moment, she wanted to answer. She wanted to rise to follow. No, Melanie hissed, yanking her back. Don't listen. The figure stilled. Slowly, its head turned toward Melanie. The whispers faltered, replaced by a silence, so sharp it felt like knives in the air. Then the voices erupted again, furious this time. Not hers. Not hers. She is not yours. Melanie gasped, clutching her ears. What is it saying? Claire's voice broke. It doesn't want you here. The figure moved closer. The shadows around it writhed, stretching across the floor like reaching fingers. Melanie staggered back, pulling Claire with her. But the air shifted. Heavy, choking. The figure loomed over them, its form blotting out the lamplight. And then, with a sound like cracking wood, the shadows peeled back. For the first time, Claire saw its face. It wasn't Clara's. Not exactly. It was a twisted echo. Eyes too large and empty, skin stretched taut, mouth curling into a grin that never belonged to a child. But beneath the distortion, the resemblance was undeniable. Clara, it crooned, voice syrupy and cruel. Claire's body betrayed her. She stepped forward, drawn like a moth to flame. No! Melanie screamed, grabbing her arm. Claire, fight it! The figure's grin widened. Its voice cut through the cacophony of whispers, speaking directly to her. You've always been Clara. You just forgot. The room tilted. Memories flickered where none should exist. Running through the hallway as a child, laughter echoing, a mother's voice calling her in for dinner. Images that weren't hers, memories that didn't belong to her. Claire clutched her head, sobbing. Stop! Stop it! Melanie shook her. It's lying. Do you hear me? Lying. But the figure only stepped closer, shadows rising like waves. Clara, it whispered, stretching out one long claw-like hand. Almost. The word hit Claire like a blow. She felt her strength draining, her will slipping away. It wasn't just calling her, it was remaking her. Each night, each whisper, each glimpse of that face had been peeling her away, layer by layer, until only Clara remained. No! Melanie screamed again. She snatched the bottle of oil from the table, the one the pastor had given Claire, and hurled it at the figure. The glass shattered at its feet. A sharp, acrid scent filled the air. For a split second, the shadows recoiled, hissing. The whispers turned shrill, angry. The figure staggered back, its form flickering violently. Claire gasped, the pull loosening. Melanie grabbed her hand. Run! They bolted for the door. But the figure moved faster. The shadows surged, slamming the door shut with a deafening crack. The latch clicked into place on its own. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, a storm of voices crashing through the house. She is ours. She cannot leave. Claire collapsed to her knees, hands pressed over her ears, rocking back and forth. The pull returned, stronger than ever, dragging her toward the shadows. Melanie threw her arms around her sister, screaming over the cacophony. Fight it! You're not Clara. You're Claire. Do you hear me? You're my sister. For a heartbeat, the voices faltered. The figure hesitated. Claire's breath came in ragged gasps. She clung to her sister's words like a lifeline. Claire, not Clara. The whispers roared back, louder, angrier. The figure lunged. And then, silence. The first rays of dawn broke through the curtains. The shadows recoiled, dissolving into nothing. The figure evaporated, leaving only the empty living room, the shattered glass glinting on the floor. Claire collapsed against Melanie, sobbing. But the relief was short-lived, because deep inside, she knew the truth. It wasn't gone. It wasn't defeated, and it wouldn't wait much longer. The house felt different after that night. Not safer, never safer, but tense like a wound that had been pressed too hard. The shadows lingered in corners longer than they should, stretching unnaturally before retreating. The whispers, though quieter in the daylight, never stopped entirely. They trailed her like echoes under her breath, waiting, biding their time. Claire hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her body felt hollow, her mind fraying at the edges. The words still rang in her skull. Almost. Melanie stayed for 2 more days, refusing to leave her sister alone. She scrubbed the house, threw open the curtains, forced Claire to eat. For brief stretches of time, Claire felt like herself again. They laughed once or twice, clinging to normalcy like survivors clinging to driftwood in a storm. But the storm always came back. On the 3rd night, Melanie jolted awake to the sound of the front door creaking open. Claire was already sitting upright in bed, wide-eyed, trembling. "It won't stop," she whispered. "It won't stop until it takes me." Melanie grabbed her shoulders. "No, we'll find a way. We'll leave tomorrow. I don't care about the lease. We'll go, both of us." Claire shook her head violently. "You don't understand. It doesn't want us. It wants me. If I leave, it will follow. If you stay, it will hurt you." As if to prove her point, the whispers surged through the house, louder than ever. This time, they weren't just calling Clara. They called Melanie's name too, twisting it into something sharp and cruel. Melanie flinched. Her lips trembled, but she forced herself to meet her sister's eyes. "Then we fight. Together." But Claire wasn't sure there was any fight left. The next day, Melanie contacted the pastor again. He hesitated when she explained, his voice heavy. "I warned her. Some doors should never be opened." "Then help us close it." Melanie snapped, her voice cracking. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, softly, "I'll pray for you. But this is beyond me." He didn't come. When Melanie told Claire, the last of her hope flickered and died. That evening, Claire began to prepare, not to resist, but to surrender. She moved slowly through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the windows as though saying goodbye. Melanie followed her anxiously. "Don't do this," she begged. "Don't give in." But Claire only whispered, "Maybe it's easier if I stop fighting. Maybe then it will let you go." Melanie's throat tightened. "No, don't you dare leave me. You're my sister, not," she faltered on the name, "not hers." But Claire wasn't listening. Her eyes were glassy, distant, fixed on the front door. When 3 a.m. came, it began like always. Click, creak. The door opened wide. But this time, the figure didn't linger. It stepped inside immediately, shadows swelling until the entire room seemed swallowed in black. The whispers screamed through the house, so loud the walls themselves vibrated. Claire rose to her feet, trembling but steady. Melanie clutched her arm. "Don't," she pleaded. "Please, Claire, don't." The figure's hollow face turned toward them, its grin stretching wider. The child's voice sang through the noise, clear and cruel. "Clara, it's time." Claire's lips parted. For the first time, she spoke back. "I'm here." "No," Melanie cried, wrapping her arms around her sister. "You're not Clara. Say it. Say you're Claire." The shadows surged forward, wrapping around Claire like tendrils. She gasped, her body jerking as the whispers poured into her skull. Flashes of memories that weren't hers filled her vision. Birthday candles she never blew out, a doll she never owned, parents' faces she didn't recognize. She screamed, clawing at her head. "Make it stop." Melanie held her tighter, sobbing. "Listen to me. You're Claire, not Clara. You're my sister. You belong here, with me, not with that." The figure loomed closer, its form towering, suffocating. Its hand reached out, stretching toward Claire's face. Almost, it whispered. Melanie's desperation turned to rage. She grabbed the shattered lamp from the floor and swung at the figure. The metal frame passed through its form, but the shadows rippled, hissing. "Get out," she screamed. "You can't have her." The figure turned, its hollow eyes fixing on Melanie. For the first time, it spoke her name aloud. "Melanie." The air dropped to freezing. Claire felt the pull shift, as though the entity considered a new target. Panic surged through her. "No," she screamed hoarsely. "Take me, not her." The shadows wrapped tighter around her, lifting her off her feet. Melanie clung to her legs, refusing to let go. The sisters cried out together, the cacophony of whispers swallowing their voices. And then something shifted. Through the storm of voices, one cut through. Softer, different. A child's voice, but not cruel this time. Fragile, afraid. "Help me." Claire froze. Her vision blurred, but in the figure's distorted face, she glimpsed it. Behind the hollow eyes, beneath the twisted grin, a child. A real child. Clara. She wasn't a monster. She was trapped in it. Claire gasped, realization hitting her like fire. "It's not Clara. It's using her." The figure shrieked, shadows convulsing. The whispers fractured, furious. Melanie clung tighter, yelling over the storm. "Then fight it. Don't let it win." Claire squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of Melanie, of laughter on their childhood road trips, of late-night talks in the dark, of everything real, everything hers. She clung to her name like a weapon. "I'm not Clara," she whispered. Then louder, "I'm not Clara. I'm Claire." The shadows recoiled, shrieking. The figure convulsed, its form unraveling. The child's voice cried out again, this time not cruel, not coaxing, but free. "Thank you." With a final, ear-splitting scream, the figure collapsed in on itself, shadows imploding like smoke sucked into a vacuum. The door slammed shut with a thunderous crack. And then, silence. Claire fell to the floor, gasping, drenched in sweat. Melanie knelt beside her, clutching her hands. "Claire," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're Claire." Claire nodded weakly. For the first time in weeks, she believed it. The house was silent after that night. Truly silent. No whispers. No footsteps. The door stayed shut. Claire and Melanie left the next morning, abandoning the lease, the furniture, everything. They didn't look back. But sometimes, late at night, Claire jolts awake at 3:02 a.m., heart racing. She stares at her bedroom door, waiting for the creak. And though it never comes, she swears she can still hear it. Almost.